In this chapter, we're going to be talking about product receiving, storing, and issuing. The objectives of this chapter include explain each of the steps in the effective product receiving process, state procedures for maintaining product quality, reducing the possibility of stockouts, and controlling costs during storage. Describe procedures for controlling product costs when products are issued from storage to production areas. Explain ways that technology can assist when receiving, storing, and issuing tasks. Product receiving of products is sometimes problematic, depending on where you're getting your products from, what condition they're coming in. There's a lot of factors that are associated with it. Is it a broken case? Are you getting a part of a case? Are you getting what we call splits? Are you getting the whole case? Does it have to be rotated? Does it have to be rotated in a specific way? There's lots of factors that go into this. So the first thing is we get ready for receiving. Getting ready for receiving, we have to have key elements in place. The first one is our receiving staff. This is the people that are responsible for receiving the product. Typically, you want to have at least 3 people in your operation that are qualified for this. In case one's on vacation, the other's out sick, you've got at least a third person that can jump in there and do this. But not everybody should be in this category. You don't need people that are part-timers that don't know what to look for. You want to make sure these individuals are highly trained and know what they're looking for in this particular case, because their responsibility is to maintain food safety standards, to maintain the prevention of bacteria from getting in your door, essentially. They do this by using appropriate technology such as thermometers and weight scales and all these kind of funky things that can be used for that. They perform physical requirements of the job. A lot of times this requires them to be able to pick up 50 pounds of flour, sacks, and big things like that. And they're able to resolve problems. This is a huge factor because they need to be able to tell the vendor when they bring the product in the door if something's wrong. Then they need to be able to have the authority to fix that as well. But they should also have an attitude of concern. They really should care what comes in your door, just as you care what comes in your door. So getting ready for receiving, now we want to check out the receiving area. What are the best locations for receiving product? Is it at the back door or is it near the cooler? Does it have to be transported from one location to another once it gets in your operation? These are all logistical questions you have to ask yourself. Sometimes when I'm receiving a truck, I may want to have them bring in the frozen goods first, have them put it in the freezer, then they can bring in the refrigerated goods, have them put it in the refrigerator, then they can bring in the dry goods, because this way I've got time to work on each one of those sectors. Once they get the frozen goods in, which is typically much smaller, I can put it away real quick, check it in real fast, and then I've got time to allow for them to put the refrigerated goods in. Do we have adequate space requirements? This is always going to be a problem in any kind of operation, whether you are putting things on shelves or you have things stored in different areas. You've got to have a lot of space requirements for storage. You can never have enough storage space. You have to keep things separate in many cases, so chemicals and janitorial supplies can't be stored anywhere near food items. What about receiving equipment? Things like simple pocket thermometers or thermocouplers. You may have to have a thermometer that reads surface temperatures of things. So there's lots of factors in that as well. Clipboards. Most people don't think about clipboards, but clipboards are very useful for having something to write on, something dependable to write on. But also keeping all your paperwork in order, keeping it lined up so you're not chasing down paperwork. Plastic tote boxes or Lexans or something along those lines where you can put the food items, take them out of the paper boxes and put them in something a little more permanent, a little more cleanliness, for cleanliness factors, something that can be used and washed and sanitized. two-wheel dollies or carts to be able to move big boxes around. Last thing you want is an injury complaint because someone moved a 100-pound box when they could have used a dolly. Weight scales, we need to verify the weights of products. So when meat comes in the door, I'm not going to take the word of the vendor that they've got on the ticket that it weighed this amount. They got on the box that it weighs this amount. I'm going to put that thing on a scale and I'm going to weigh it for myself. And increasingly needed, we see things like tablets and laptops. Handheld devices are very popular these days. Infrared scanning, QR codes, things along those lines are really good for keeping track of inventory these days. So when we compare delivery invoice to the purchase order, we're going to, as soon as they walk in the door, we're going to take a copy of our purchase order that we did, whether it's the order guide that we went down or whether it's a combined order that we put together and emailed them or called it in or put it in on the computer. We're going to take that and we're going to compare it to the delivery invoice. We want to see that we're getting what we paid for, what we asked for are the same things. So the first step in this is we compare a copy of the purchase order or order summary sheet with the delivery invoice. We want to look for quantity, matching products, weights, etc. After that, we want to confirm product quality. We reject if damaged or if safety or quality concerns. If we're going to reject it, we need to make sure that a credit memo is issued, and this way we can ensure that we are not charged for that product. You don't want to necessarily just strike it off the invoice. Some companies operate that way, but I would prefer to have a credit memo because now I've got a paper trail of that particular item. Notify the vendor for replacements or substitutes as soon as possible. If they can get it to you, they may have to do what's called a hot shot and send it out to you right away, or they may have to find some other way of doing it. Sometimes they can't get it, and you may have to go to the store and buy that product. Note the rejected product on the delivery invoice. You definitely want to make sure that any irregularities are identified on that delivery invoice so you don't get charged for it. And then notify the operations or the chef or the manager of the function so that they're aware of what's going on as well. And inform the manager when the problem is resolved. Signing the delivery invoice. Signing the invoice signifies everything is correct. Do not sign unless you are sure or if corrections are made. Once you sign, it is your product, your responsibility. After signing, products should be put away quickly. Put away freezer first, then refrigerated, and then dry goods can wait if necessary. Write the date received. This is called marking the date. So whether it's a day dot with the date on it, a product label, or simply a Sharpie that you write on the product what date it was received. This is a good way to force rotation of that product. We use something called FIFO, first in, first out. That means the oldest product is going to come to the front, the newest product is going to go to the back, and we're going to use the oldest product first. It was the first in the door, it's going to be the first to go out the door. There are situations where you want to use LIFO, last in, first out. So this would be a good example of when you maybe have a salad bar and you want to use the freshest possible ingredients on the salad bar. You may use the celery that's been in there a couple of weeks for making stock. Doesn't matter if it's a little loosey-goosey, but the fresh stuff you want to put on the salad bar. Update perpetual inventory if you're using it. Perpetual inventory is the process of keeping the inventory updated all the time, constantly, by using requisitions and credit memos and invoices. You're constantly keeping track of that, and then you're periodically doing a physical inventory. Complete receiving report. The receiving report is known by many names, but it's essentially a reconciliation for accounting purposes. This helps calculate your food cost. These days, it's done on a computer software or by spreadsheet by updating pricing to the most recent and current of prices. Some special receiving concerns. We want to ensure quality, and how we do that, first we use product specifications to verify that the product is of good quality. So we want to verify that our product spec that we order off of It matches what we're receiving in, the quality, the quantity, the item name. Maybe you want a specific brand name. I don't know if you're like me, I like my Cheese Whiz. I don't want a cheese substitute on my Philly cheesesteak sandwich. Yeah, I said it, Cheese Whiz on a cheesesteak. Look for signs of poor quality in the boxing, packaging, and storing of the product. Look for signs of time and temperature abuse, such as slacked out seafood. We'll talk more about that later. This is seafood that's been frozen. Look for signs of time and temperature abuse, such as slacked out seafood. This is seafood that's been frozen, then thawed to appear fresh. This is fine if that's what you're intending for purpose, but it's not okay if you specifically purchase fresh fish. WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. This should be the acronym that's always on your mind when you are looking at your product. It should look good, it should smell good, it should be good. If it's not, you need to send it back. Check all layers, not just the top. I've received cases of lettuce that look good on the surface, but when you open it up and you get down to the bottom, the lettuce is mush and just bleh. Ensuring food safety. Look for expired dates, signs of thawing and refreezing, pest damage, and other concerns. Clean and sanitize your equipment such as tables, scales, dollies, carts, etc. before receiving anything. It's really important that you have a clean environment if you're going to maintain the cleanliness once it comes in. Check your temperatures. Make sure that the product is coming in the proper temperature range for that product. So eggs should be no more than 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Beef and chicken and all these others should come in at no more than 41 degrees Fahrenheit. You're also going to look at how it's packaged. So we may have reduced oxygen packaging or modified atmosphere packaging. Reduced oxygen packaging, we know it as a simple term called vacuum sealing. So we remove the oxygen out of that. MAP or modified atmosphere packaging, this is where you see maybe a puffy sort of package where a modified atmosphere has been put in there, like nitrogen has been pumped into it, and it looks like a balloon. This is to protect it. This is a good example of this is potato chips. You get a bag of potato chips, it feels full, but it's really not because they've had to pump in that atmosphere in there to prevent the chips from staling, but also to prevent crush damage. The person checking in the shipment should be food safety certified. I can't emphasize this enough. This individual needs to be the most trained, the best well-equipped individual in your receiving department. They need to know exactly what they're looking for, signs of bad product, anything that needs to get sent back. They need to be well-versed in food safety. Implementing security concerns. Some of the security concerns, these may not sound like security concerns, but they really are. The wrong weights or counts. We want to secure the product as the product that we want. I mean, we don't want a bad product. We don't want the wrong product. So we want to make sure that we're getting the right weights and counts. We're looking for the right way to meet. Maybe someone took something out of that package. Maybe someone added something to that package. You always want to be careful about that. Make sure it matches what it's supposed to. Missing items and items that are of improper quality all fall under this category as well. And then finally, managing credit memos. Credit memos are treated like an invoice, and they're processed much the same way. The difference is they can indicate the difference in weight or count or indicate a mispick or an item that was accidentally substituted. It usually has the right pick sticker, but it's the wrong product or item. So this is an example of a product memo, a credit memo rather, excuse me. So this is dated 9/22/22, and it's got the credit memo number on it. This is from the vendor Vinny's Seafood El Camino, 123 side of the road, Cordova, Tennessee, 38016. And it was sold to some brave soul. It's got the account number here. So we want to make sure that it's linked to the correct account number and when the invoice was occurred. And then it's going to give the item. Now, this could be a code for the item. In this case, code number 3422 is a code for shrimp head on, peeled and deveined. 21.25. I just made that up. That's what it looks like. But it could also be spelled out as all of that. A lot of times we like to use shorthand because it's just faster. Product unit or the purchase unit is included on here. We want to make sure that we know how we're buying it. We're buying it by the case, by the pound, by the each, or whatever it might be. The number of purchase units, in this case, it was two of them. We bought two cases at $35.14 for a total of $70.28. This is what we sent back. We're getting a credit to our account in the form of $70.28. And this was for incorrect quality because if you're buying seafood from Vinny on an El Camino pickup truck on the side of the road in Cordova, Tennessee, you're probably not worried about quality that much. So I'm just saying, not the best way to buy seafood. And then, of course, you want to make sure the vendor signs it, the purchaser signs it, and everybody's happy at that point. What happens if you have a receiving challenge? What do you do with it? Some of the receiving challenges could be things like vendor back orders. They may not have the product in stock. This is a situation where you're going to have to remedy it pretty quickly because a lot of times you're waiting on that product to come in the door so you can serve it. Problems with quantities or purchase unit sizes. So I mentioned earlier that I love Cheese Whiz on my Philly cheesesteak sandwich. Not that cheese spread stuff. Cheese Whiz. Big difference. What if I can't get Cheese Whiz? What if I can only get the cheese spread stuff? Or what if the Cheese Whiz that I bought, I thought was supposed to be a number 10 can, which is the large cans, the really, really big cans. But it turned out to be a number 10T can, which is a much more narrow can and tall. Um, and it's not enough for my purposes. So what do I do in that case? So I need to be able to watch out for these sorts of things, especially if it's a mispick and I get charged for the wrong thing. Problems with on-site storage, and we're talking about at the vendor's location, not our storage. Maybe they had an air conditioning or a refrigeration unit that went down and caused problems with the product in that refrigeration. On-site storage capabilities. They may not have the capability to bring in that product. Maybe you need only a small amount of that product, and it's not worth their time to bring it in. Or maybe you need a lot of that product and they don't have the storage capability to support that much. Coordination between receiving staff and purchasers. We need to make sure that the lines of communication are always kept open for that. We want to make sure that the people that are buying the stuff and the people that are receiving the stuff are on the same page. That way that the people that are receiving it know exactly what it is they're supposed to be getting. Now, this is often accomplished by product specifications and order guides and purchase orders and things along those lines. So let's talk about storage, where things are stored. And one of the best places to store stuff that is shelf stable, doesn't need refrigeration, we call it dry goods storage area or dry storage. This is a typical example of what you would see in dry storage. It contains things like canned goods and condiments, bakery products like flour and sugar, dried herbs and spices. So I didn't say fresh herbs, this is dried herbs and spices. Typically, you're going to see it like this. It's well lit, well ventilated. Hopefully, it's not crowded. It's clean. The shelves need to be at least 6 inches off the ground so you can clean underneath it. And they need to be able to breathe. So you need to have shelves that have an open arrangement so you're not just allowing for moisture to build up in there. Should be somewhere around 50 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, ideally. Here in the South, we never really reach 70 degrees in restaurant kitchens or in environments like that. So it's not always the case, but we want to try and keep it as low a temperature as possible, as reasonable as we can anyway. Refrigerated storage. We call this a walk-in cooler because you can walk into it, but we're also referring to the reach-in coolers as well. The cooler spaces that are just open like a household refrigerator, but we use commercial refrigeration because we can get more stuff in there. This is at 41 degrees or below. Now, I'll be honest with you, if I set my refrigerators to 41 degrees, my product is going to go bad in there pretty fast. And the reason for it is it's just simply not cold enough at 41 degrees. I need to set the refrigerator to about 36 degrees, and that's going to account for me opening and closing the door periodically and letting in the warm air. This is things like fresh meats and produce, seafood and dairy products, and open containers of products. So this is something you also want to keep in mind whenever you are setting up a refrigeration system, that you leave enough space in there for products that need to be refrigerated after opening. Frozen storage, or the freezer. This is honestly one of my favorite places. On a Friday night when I'm exhausted and burning up and hot, I'll go step into the freezer and it's just like steam is pouring off of me. And that's because this is at 10 degrees Fahrenheit or as low as negative 35 or 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I worked on a cruise ship where it was negative 45 degrees Fahrenheit for, well, unfortunately, for body storage if someone died on board and we were at sea. But that's a rare case. Typically, it's just to keep the ice cream nice and cold. Things like frozen meats, poultry, and seafoods, French fries and other pre-cooked items, frozen fruits and vegetables, frozen breads. Breads store really well in the freezer for extended periods of time as needed. Then you want to have something for broken case storage. We call broken case storage splits or open cases. It doesn't mean that anything's broken in it. It just means that it is opened and the contents are removed from the storage case. So for instance, we may get in a rack, a case of number 10 cans of that Cheese Whiz that I oh so love. And we're going to take it out of the box because boxes take up shelf space. We're going to take it out of the box and we're going to store the cans on what's called a can rack. And this is an example of a can rack that you can see. This could be in multiple areas. We could have one in the dry goods. We can have one in refrigerated and one in frozen as well. So we may have an area for that broken storage in there for whatever it might be. Can racks, open products, partial cases of items, things along those lines. So let's talk about some of the storage basics and inventory basics that we have to go over. Typically, we're going to deal with a few categories here. One of them is quality concerns. We want to make sure that the product is of good quality. We don't want to sell things that are bad quality. So obviously, we want to monitor that. One of the leading causes of illness in the restaurant industry is because of failure to maintain the quality of the product. There's another issue with cleanliness of hands and things like that, but we're going to stick with this today. So this is an example of checking the quality of the chicken as it comes in the door. We're using a probe thermometer that's going to register that. This chicken is on ice. It's on crushed ice with a drain pan underneath it. It's a good way of storing fish as well, especially if it's whole. We want to monitor the temperature of each refrigerator. We want to have line check sheets so that we go down the line every 3 hours and we check the line for time and temperature. We check it for setup to make sure that everything's out and ready to go in proper quantities. And we do taste tests, to be quite frankly. This is one of the reasons why we don't want to eat our own food after the day's over with, is because we've been tasting our food all day long. We schedule regular preventative maintenance for refrigerators, things like dusting the coils. Most people don't realize that the coils have to be dusted on a quarterly basis, or more if you have a really dusty environment, because that is what's going to clog up your vent and cause your refrigeration to overwork and fail. Also, things like don't overloading the refrigerators. I see it day in and day out when you open up a refrigerator and it is just jam-packed with 1,000 things, boxes and everything else, and it doesn't breathe. You can't get any airflow in there. Keep refrigerator doors as closed as much as possible. Wrap or cover food properly and label as needed. And then store raw meat, poultry, and seafood separately from ready-to-eat foods. Some general guidelines also in the freezer. Set freezer and to a temperature that'll keep products frozen. You don't want your freezer set at around 30, 32 degrees because that's just the top end of frozen. It's going to thaw and freeze again multiple times. You don't want that because the way the freezer works, it will shut itself off temporarily to allow the coils to thaw. But if you got it set low enough, it'll never get above 32 degrees. Check them regularly. Keep frozen food delivers in freezers as soon as they've been inspected. Ensure good airflow is really important. Defrost the freezer units regularly. If you got a good freezer unit, it should do this automatically. Clearly label food and keep the unit closed as much as possible. I actually recommend on every freezer door in the walk-in freezers, you have a latch that you can throw like a bolt to keep it closed. I recommend keeping that bolt closed because that's going to prevent any moisture from getting in through the door, which can cause condensation, and it looks like snow inside the door. But it can cause ice dams in there as well. In the dry goods area, you want to keep it at a proper temperature and make sure it's well ventilated and keep it away from direct sunlight. Direct sunlight is the enemy of a lot of things in the food industry, so we want to stay away from that. Our storage locations, again, make sure that we have adequate space for them, make sure that it's clean, make sure that it's organized. Clean your refrigerators periodically when they need to be cleaned. Make sure in this case, in the ingredient bin here, that it has a lid for it. I see it multiple times. They'll have things in the ingredient bin, but no lid. If you're using a scoop in there, the scoop has to be out, the handle of the scoop has to be located outside of the product. It cannot be buried in the product to where you have to reach your hand into the product to get the scoop out. That's just gross. It's nasty. And then keep records. I can't emphasize this enough. If you don't write it down, it didn't happen. So it's really important that you keep adequate records. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what everybody has been dreading. We're going to talk about a little bit of math.
Cost of goods sold, commonly referred to as COGS, are the expenses directly associated with producing a product, such as the cost and transportation of raw materials, labor needed to manufacture the goods, and storage fees. COGS does not include indirect costs, such as sales, marketing, or distribution expenses. From an accounting perspective, COGS is not an asset, nor is it a liability. It is recorded as an expense on an income statement. The cost of goods sold relies on the value of inventory during an accounting period, which can be calculated by taking the beginning inventory, adding purchases during the period, and then subtracting the ending inventory. As an example, if a business has a beginning inventory of $9,000, makes purchases valued at $5,000, and is left with an ending inventory of $2,000, the COGS is $12,000. Understanding the cost of goods sold is important for many reasons, including setting prices that leave healthy profit margins, driving important decision-making like finding new vendors with better material prices, and is a key component in determining a business's gross profit and net income. Ultimately, the cost of goods sold is a critical piece of information businesses need to become more profitable.
Cost of goods sold, or COGS, is a simple calculation. Take the beginning inventory, which should be the same as the ending inventory from the previous month, and add any purchases made during that month. Then subtract out the ending inventory from the end of that month. That's it. That's all it is. Here's what the formula looks like. Cost of goods sold equals beginning inventory plus purchases minus ending inventory. Simple. So let's take, for instance, a January beginning inventory of $39,500. By the way, this would have been the December ending inventory as well. So the ending inventory becomes the new beginning inventory. We purchased $86,000 worth of items during the month of January. And then at the end of January, we count the inventory again, which is the beginning inventory for February, and it's $37,500. We plug our numbers in. We take our beginning inventory of $39,500. We add our purchases, $86,000. And then we subtract out our ending inventory, $37,500. And this gives us a cost of goods sold of $88,000. That is the cost of the products that we have sold out the door. Doesn't account for the products we still have left, but everything that we've sold that went out the door cost us $88,000. Inventory turnover rate is the number of times each accounting period. Accounting period could be a month, a period which we call, which I'll explain, 13. There's 13 periods in a month, each one containing 4 weeks, or a quarter, depending on the operation. So the number of times each accounting period that the quantity of food and beverages in inventory must be purchased to generate the food and beverage revenue for the accounting period. Blah, blah, blah. What does that mean? In other words, how often during that period do you need to purchase that product? So in order to determine this, we have to take our cost of goods sold, which we just calculated, and we're going to divide it by our average inventory. What's average inventory? Well, what's an average? An average is one thing plus one thing divided by the number of things, right? That's all an average is. So if we look at it, the cost of goods sold divided by our beginning inventory plus our ending inventory divided by 2. We had 2 inventories. We're going to add them together and we're going to divide by 2. And that's going to give us an average. So this is what it looks like mathematically. We take our cost of goods sold, which we calculated previously, of $88,000, and we divide it by our average inventory, which is $39,500 plus $37,500 divided by 2. This gives us 88,000 divided by 38,500, which gives us a inventory turnover rate of 2.29. So that means in this period in January, we purchased that item 2.29 times. That's important to know because some items are going to be more expensive, some items are going to be less expensive, but we need to know how often we need to buy those things. So let's look at this example. What is the inventory turnover rate given the following information? Cost of food inventory at the beginning of the month was $64,750. The cost of food inventory at the end of the month was $71,225. And the food cost, or cost of goods sold, for the month was $139,400. So what we do is we take our $139,400, which is our cost of goods sold, COGS, we divide it by our average inventory. And again, we get our average inventory by taking our beginning inventory plus our ending inventory and divide by 2 because there's 2 inventories. This is going to give us $139,400 divided by $67,988, roughly rounded up, which gives us an inventory turnover rate of 2.05 times. Now we have to ask ourselves, how many days will the food and inventory last? So we need to know how long before we need to order that product again. This is really easy. We take the number of days in our cycle. In this case, we use 30 days. We divide it by 2.05 times, and that tells us we roughly have 15 days worth of product on hand at any given time. Let's talk about adjustments in the cost of goods sold. So here's an example of a calculation of cost of goods sold chart. This is for determining any kind of cost of goods sold value. We have our beginning inventory at the top of $83,575. We have our purchases during January for food. Very important because you want to calculate food inventory, you want to calculate beverage inventory, you might even want to calculate paper plastic inventory separate, and may have separate calculations for those. Because honestly, paper and plastic is not necessarily included in food cost, but some restaurants write it as part of their food cost recipe. That's a little complicated. We'll talk about that later. But we end up here with the total value of food available during January. This is basically our beginning inventory plus purchases. We subtract out our value of food inventory, our ending inventory, which is 89,500, and then we get our adjusted cost of goods, our unadjusted cost of goods sold. Now, I call it unadjusted cost of goods sold because now we have to add some adjustments in. And some of these adjustments may be transfers. Transfers can be internal or external. We have to adjust for our credit memos first and foremost also, but we can do transfers as well. So what do I mean by internal or external transfers? An example of an internal transfer might be within the restaurant itself. So maybe the kitchen makes a vodka sauce. So we have to transfer one 75 milliliter bottle of vodka from the bar to the kitchen. So that's an example of an internal transfer. In this case, the credit is to the bar and the debit is to the kitchen. But we also may have an external example as well. An external example is, let's say, for instance, a restaurant company owns multiple restaurants, and one restaurant runs out of a product and they have to borrow some from another restaurant. Essentially, what they're doing is they're buying it from that other restaurant. It goes off of their inventory and onto the other restaurant's inventory. So it's a credit to one and a debit to the other. So this is adjustments in the cost of goods sold. It could be through beverages, it could be through food, but we want to account for those. And then you get eventually a adjusted cost of goods sold. And here it shows transfers to beverage, transfers to labor cost, such as employee meals, transfer to marketing. Maybe they're giving away comp food or whatever it might be. So all of these have to be considered. It's not just simply beginning inventory plus purchases minus ending inventory. There are more small nuance factors associated with it. Some security concerns. I need to tell you this little story. So years ago, we instituted a package inspection program in our restaurant. Basically, they could not bring in any kind of backpacks or big purses. We're talking about the staff or anything along those lines. So, and the reason for it is because I had one employee who tried to steal a beef tenderloin. Now, if you know what a beef tenderloin looks like, it's bigger than your arm. It's almost as big as many people's leg. It's a pretty big cut of meat. We're talking about a whole beef tenderloin. It's got a larger head at the top and is tapered at the bottom. So how did he get this out of the restaurant? Well, he rolled up his pant leg and duct taped it to his leg. Yeah. But he didn't think I would notice him limping a little bit as he walked out. I called it almost like a pimp walk. He was limping out of the store. So I stopped him, asked him some questions, nonchalantly, talking to him. And I kind of gave him a little pat on the leg, like, I know what you got. I know what's going on. And he broke down and started crying. He was so sorry about it. He said his family was hungry. He's not making enough money in this job. And the sob story began. I sat down with him. I talked to him, found out what was going on. I didn't fire him. I invited him back. I made sure that he brought his family with him that evening, brought them in this evening, and fed them. I didn't fire him. I invited him and his family back for dinner that evening, and we fed him. And we fed him several days in a row. And I made sure that we found out what the root cause was, that we got him the assistance he needed, whether it was more hours or better pay. And actually what he ended up doing was working two job functions. One had a higher rate of pay than the other, and then he would work one as well for a different rate of pay. And this one little act actually changed this guy's life. About 2 years later, he was my sous chef. Now, at this point, he was working in the dish, working in scullery. He became my sous chef 2 years later. And when I left the operation, he took over as executive chef of the operation. So you never know what's going on, but you also have to be aware of what's happening with your product. But because of this situation, he helped me actually institute a package inspection program to where they couldn't bring in any kind of large packages, couldn't bring any kind of large bags or anything along those lines, but yet still was able to, we could bring in the clear backpacks and things along those lines. Had another incident where a cook tried to take a whole ribeye home, whole ribeye loin, by putting it between two trash bags and taking out the trash, quote unquote, taking out the trash. I found that out. I found out what was going on. He just wanted to sell it for money, didn't really care about anything else. He was fired. So, two different situations, completely different situations. So, you really have to be on charge of your inventory. Product issuing procedures, we want to make sure that we have effective issuing. And we're talking about here, especially if you're doing a perpetual inventory system, that you should have inventory sheets. They should come to you with a requisition. You should fill that requisition with no more than what they ask for, no less than what they ask for. Make sure the product is appropriate. Typically, you're going to see this kind of environment in hotels and places like that might have a large purchasing department and storage department, and they issue out the products to the kitchen. So this is an example of a product issue requisition form. Here you're going to ask for the product that you want, the number of items issued, or the size of the item, the issue unit. In this case, it's 6-ounce portions. The number of those issues. You're going to include the cost per unit and the extended cost as well. And then you're going to sum the product up down at the bottom. Now, not all places are going to have the cost on there. That may be left to an accountant or someone like that does it. But typically, you're going to have something along there that's going to record that. And then the person issuing it will authorize it. They'll put it in the computer system, give you the product, and it comes off the inventory. Now, if you have to return it, there's a credit memo that goes with it as well. You return it back to the storeroom. You do an issue requisition form again, except you would, instead of number of issue units, you would put a negative number, and that puts it back in inventory. Technology and receiving and storaging and issuing. Today, we are less dependent on paper and pencil. We're more dependent on our little gadgets and doohickeys, our iPhones and Galaxies and iPads and all this other kind of stuff. We use laptops and we use mini computers, and we've got more computer calculation in our hand than they did when they went to the moon. So why not leverage that? Why not use it? Use QR codes or barcodes to keep track of your inventory. We can manage our inventory using FIFO rotation better this way. We can restrict access to usage data. Data security is always going to be really important. We use our point of sale system for inventory and stock management. We can literally use our POS by entering in our invoices that we receive. Use it like a perpetual inventory system. Every time we ring up an item, it immediately takes some of that stuff out of inventory. We no longer have to account for it. Regular check-ins on your inventory usage. You still want to do physical check-ins, but you can use technology when you're doing that. Instead of having to write it on pencil and paper, you do it directly into the computer, and it takes a lot less time with keying in. Receipt management as well. All of these are part of the restaurant inventory management process using technology these days. So this is an article I found in the Restaurant Times. It's a really excellent article on keeping track of your restaurant inventory and controlling food costs. They give a few tips here on how to keep the tight control of your restaurant inventory. So the first thing is monitor daily consumption. You want to always make sure that you are paying attention to how much inventory your operation is using on a daily basis. It could be whether or not it's the number of steaks you sell or the number of widgets you sell. widgets are a fictional product, but any of those have a potential for being disastrous to the restaurant if you're not following up on that. If you're dealing with steaks, it's very easy to quote unquote overcook a steak and lose one, or you have to throw it away, or whatever the purposes is. So you really want to keep an eye on this sort of thing. Place an order when required. Have a schedule on when you put your order in. If you're doing an order once a week, you have a schedule and you have a specific day and time that order goes in. Be consistent with it. This is really important. Consistency is king all throughout. This is going to help you avoid any unwanted food waste, and it's going to increase your input costs as well if you're not careful. So we really want to keep a consistent record. Focus on recipe management. Now, this is one of the things that I deal with a lot in the restaurant industry, because I deal with a lot of restaurants that have specific restaurant recipe specifications. So if the recipe says 4 ounces of green beans, and I give them 5 ounces of green beans on a regular basis. Now, it doesn't sound like much on one plate, but if I sell 200 of those plates, now I've given away 200 ounces of green bean extra in that day. And I may not have that quantity to give away. I'm going to run out of it too fast. I'm going to run out, and I'm going to have to call my vendor and say, oh my gosh, I got to have green beans. What do I do? And they can't get it to me in time. So these are things you need to keep in mind. Focus on this recipe management. Make sure that the recipe is being adhered to properly. Calculate the variance. It's really, it is a known fact that the restaurant industry is notorious for theft and pilferage. While it is the cash counter, which has become infamous for a lot of these activities, the stock and inventory section is not far behind on that. One of the best ways to make sure that no misappropriations are happening in your absence in the kitchen is to check the variance daily report. Typically, this helps in you tracking the variance between the actual physical stock consumption and the ideal stock consumption. Think about the steak count sheets that we talked about last chapter. Usually a 6 to 7% variance is acceptable. That can be accounted for wastage, or what we call shrinkage. Anything more than that implies misappropriations. Analyze the yield of each stock item. We want to make sure that we're getting the right yield out of that item. So for instance, that can of Cheese Whiz I was talking about. If I'm doing 2-ounce scoops of Cheese Whiz, then I need to know how many scoops of Cheese Whiz are going to be in that container, and how many scoops of Cheese Whiz are going to be in that case. So these are factors that I need to be able to know in order to properly order. And then manage the shelf life of stock items. The last thing you want is for items to just be sitting on the shelf, taking up space, taking up money. We want to keep our inventory as low as possible, while still make sure that we have the appropriate amount of product on hand to satisfy our customers. So there's a lot of juxtaposition that has to happen. Okay, guys, that's it for product receiving and storing and issues. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one.